So again, we skipped over document D, and you're welcome to use evidence from it if you'd like. But we are going to focus on document E, which is a rather shorter one. And again, it focuses on motherhood being the most important function of the women in Sparta, the freeborn women in Sparta. One of the things is that they insist on physical training for the female, no less than for the male. So they're going to have to undergo the same physical training that, their male counterparts would have. Okay, sounds pretty fair, sounds pretty good. It says to encourage the good education. They even consider their conception at birth. They regulate marriages. They make sure that the maidens, as in young unmarried women, are wrestling, running, throwing this iron wing that is tossed like a horseshoe, casting the dart, which is a javelin, to the end that the fruit, or baby, that they would conceive would be strong and healthy. We know scientifically that women who are in good health, that exercise and have proper nutrition, tend to birth healthier babies. Obviously, that's not always the case. Sometimes things come up, and definitely the male that is participating in the creating of the offspring is, his health is going to affect that too. But of course, they didn't know that back then, so they just associated with the women, right? And it says that they do believe if both parents are strong, they produce more vigorous offspring, which again, we know that because of science. But again, things can still happen. You can have two very strong, very healthy parents, and you can still have a baby born with, a birth defect or some kind of disability. And, we embrace people whether or not they have disabilities. But in ancient Sparta, they didn't, right? If you had a disability, they would consider you useless. And so that's going to affect the context through which we're looking at document E. So Spartan girls, keep in mind, they did not learn much about housekeeping because those helot servants did all of the domestic work. Okay, they believed that Spartan girls entered the public education system, but they didn't live in barracks like the boys did. They did get some reading and writing, but they had a lot of physical training: running, jumping, throwing, wrestling, singing, and dancing. If they passed the physical fitness test, they would be assigned a husband, and in most ways, they were considered equal to men. They could go out in public, participate in religious ceremonies, inherit, manage property. They couldn't participate in government, but they still had a fair amount of rights compared to women in other city-states like Athens. So even women who died in childbirth, were considered strong because bearing women was considered an honorable, you could even say a patriotic act. So some of the strengths that they talk about, hard physical training so that they produce strong offspring. So let's find a quote that supports that. So if we're going for the strength of physical training to produce strong offspring, okay, so we have physical training for the female, which again comes back to if both parents are strong, they produce more vigorous offspring. Okay, we're going to label that a strength and say that training young girls to be strong and healthy women would enable or allow them to birth strong children who would then become soldiers or mothers themselves. Okay, so you could consider that a strength. You could also consider the fact that they are treated, equally as their male counterparts a strength too. They're getting those same opportunities for the most part. They don't get to vote in government. Okay. You could argue, a weakness, saying, they focus too much on the body and not on the mind. And that they could have used people like scientists and doctors or poets and artists, too much focus on the body and not as much on the mind. So, you could argue too that, by regulating their marriages, right, and forcing them to do all this physical activity is going to, affect their affect their abilities, but also their opportunities, right? What they're able to do in society. Physical strength was highly valued in Sparta, but at the cost of not having innovation, which requires scientists, doctors, thinkers, engineers, etc. So again, we know they value physical strength. We understand that it's important to the people of Sparta. At the same time, by regulating their marriages and forcing them to do all of these things, right, they are focusing so much on the body, as seen here, and not as much on the mind, which means that they are lacking in some areas. They don't have innovation. You can't invent stuff or heal people or discover medicine or learn about the stars if you don't have the time to do that, because it is so frowned upon in society.